Professor Don Rothwell is an international law expert at the Australian National University. He's in our Canberra studio. Professor Rothwell, thank you for your time. Now, why would Julian Assange choose Ecuador?
Well, presumably on two grounds. One is that if he is if he is successful in getting asylum in Ecuador, he would be beyond the reach of the current Swedish arrest warrant that's been issued against him. And of course, that's under a European legal system, and that doesn't extend to Latin America. But secondly, the other ground would be is that Assange would then enjoy some level of protection against a possible extradition request by the United States because of the particular extradition arrangements that exist between Ecuador and the US.
So Ecuador is not a signatory then to the International Extradition Treaty, or is it just one of those, it's just not a treaty that they have with the US?
Ecuador does have an extradition treaty with the United States, concluded in 1872 and updated in 1939. But because of the age of the treaty, it may not be broad enough to cover the types of charges that the United States might seek to bring against Assange in terms of his publication of US classified material. It also has within that treaty a so-called political offence exception, which Assange could rely upon to deflect any extradition request by the United States.
So do you think a move like this would have been semi-pre-planned? Do you think his legal team would have maybe foreshadowed that rejection of the failed appeal in the High Court in Sweden and maybe had this as a backup plan?
Well, certainly the Assange legal team have explored all of the legal options open to them. This is a very radical step, because if Assange is granted asylum in Ecuador, that very much limits his ability to move throughout the world. So he's really saying, well, look, I'm confident that I have a future in Ecuador, and indeed that he will be able to continue his journalistic activities with WikiLeaks there.
Now, the Australian government's actually been quite positive about their support of Julian Assange. They said that, in fact, the resources that have been put into him has pretty much surpassed anyone who's been in trouble overseas, I guess. If Julian Assange does manage to be extradited to Ecuador, do you think the Australian government will continue to try and get him back to Australia?
Well, look, I think the Attorney-General, Nicola Roxon, has indicated that Mr Assange is free to return to Australia as he pleases, subject to the finalisation of his legal proceedings currently in the United Kingdom. If Mr Assange was to go to Ecuador and then seek to come to Australia, he would lose the protection of asylum in Ecuador and could be subject to extradition requests not only by the United States, but he'd still presumably be subject to an outstanding extradition request by Sweden. So Mr Assange's legal position could become quite complex if he is successful in getting asylum in Ecuador.
It just seems like that position that he has is getting more complex the more solutions that his legal team tries to find. Is there an end point where there won't be a solution if, say, this one is not successful?
Well, quite clearly, if he's not granted asylum to Ecuador, he will be effectively asked to remove himself from the Ecuadorian embassy in London. At the moment, the extradition to Sweden is pending. That could occur in as little as 8 days' time. And then, of course, if he is extradited to Sweden to answer these sexual assault matters in which he's wanted for questioning, that will commence the Swedish legal proceedings, and who knows where that will take him.
Right, so he really is in legal limbo. Julian Assange, like this is obviously a bold move. What do you think his move might be if he does end up being extradited to Ecuador? Do you think he would just stay there and hole up?
Well, very much so, because his options in terms of moving around the world will be quite limited then, because he will be enjoying some level of immunity in Ecuador. He has the protection of the US Ecuador extradition treaty, as we've discussed. So once he leaves Ecuador, he will lose those levels of protection, and he will then only be able to fall back effectively on the Australian government. Now, of course, another option open to Mr Assange is to seek citizenship in Ecuador, and I say that only because Ecuador refuses to extradite its citizens to the United States, so that option might also be open to him down the track.
Professor John Rothwell in Canberra, thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome.